Hello, this is David with Everything Economics, and today we're going to talk about another key economic indicator, the U.S. unemployment rate. We're going to talk about some of the concepts, trends, and policy. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, the outline for this presentation, we're going to start with a definition and how the unemployment rate is measured. Then we'll go into the types of unemployment, frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. Then we'll talk about some of the key causes and determinants, the economic and social impacts, and I'll also present to you with some recent data and some short-term trends, and then finally policy responses and debates. So what is the unemployment rate? Well, first of all, it's a percentage of the labor force that is unemployed and actively looking for work. Now, that's a key word, actively looking. So, for example, if let's just say you're a stay-at-home wife or a stay-at-home husband and you're not seeking work, well, then you're not actually part of the unemployment statistics. Um, Same again, let's say you are in college, but you're not working and you're not looking for a job, then you are not considered unemployed. And this is true for any adult who, for whatever reason, they have chosen not to look for a job and are not actively seeking employment. So you would not be considered as a statistic in the unemployment rate. Uh, Next, it's measured via the current population survey or household survey by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So they are in charge of gathering the data and determining what the unemployment rate is, and excludes those. As we said, it excludes those not actively searching. Um, Also maybe some discouraged workers. So, for example, let's say you've been looking for a job for 6 months, but you can't find anything and you just give up. You would not be considered part of the unemployment rate after that point. It also excludes those that are working in the military or in other government institutions, uh, since that would not be considered part of the unemployment rate. So let's continue. Types of unemployment. Well, frictional unemployment is short-term transitions between jobs. So, for example, let's say you get a layoff from one company and you are trying to look for another uh, job. That would be frictional unemployment, or maybe not layoff. Maybe you just quit. You don't like the job and you're going to try to look for something else. So those short-term transitions is considered frictional unemployment. The next type of unemployment is structural. This is a mismatch between worker skills and job requirements. So let's say you have I don't know, we'll just say a college degree in engineering, but say you cannot find an engineering job, and so you end up having to take maybe a customer service job. You have the skills for engineering, but you are working in something that is not what you prepared for or not what your skills are. So you're working in a totally different type of job or type of industry, and that would be considered structural unemployment. Another example is that let's say you have an accounting degree and you are, again, say you're working in, I don't know, warehousing, or you're working in a Starbucks coffee shop, uh, that you have the mismatch of skills. You're not doing what you are trained for or qualified for. Then we have cyclical unemployment. This is driven by the cycle. So, for example, recessions, expansions, depressions. Um, you may have a job for a long time, but then the economy goes down and businesses are cutting back on their operations or laying off employees, and you're unemployed due to that, not necessarily for any other reason. And then there is seasonal unemployment, which this is like a predictable calendar related changes in demand. So, for example, if you are working in like maybe hotel and leisure during the summertime, during the peak season, you may be working for 3 months, and then after that, they don't need you anymore because it's the season has closed, or the high season has ended, and they don't need so many employees, and so they lay off, or they only hire temporarily. Another example would be like during the holiday shopping season. Many stores, such as Target, Walmart, and other department stores, they might hire extra staff during the holiday shopping season, but after the season is over, like in January, they uh, they get rid of those temporary employees, and so there's seasonal unemployment. All right, causes and determinants. Well, there's aggregate demand fluctuations and business cycle effects. Well, put that in simple words. Um, as demand changes by consumers, uh, then you may have situations where uh, the industry itself is suffering because maybe consumers do not need or want your products anymore, and so it uh, that may be one cause. For example, a really old example would be like typewriters. Typewriters, I remember back in the 80s, typewriters was very popular, but then we had the word processing by computers that kind of replaced typewriters. And so if you're working in a typewriter factory, uh, and your industry is coming to an end, well, you're going to be laid off, and your skills may not necessarily be needed anymore. Another thing is like manufacturing. When a lot of manufacturing jobs went over to China and other countries, like in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, um, suddenly you might find yourself unemployed because the manufacturing base that you have normally been employed with is no longer there. And so this is like uh, a change in the demand for manufacturing skills. Technological change and skill mismatches, that's also a structural. So, as we improve our uh, technology, there becomes a change in demand for skills. One of the biggest things right now is AI. So I don't know if you've read about it in any of the like the Wall Street Journal or any other financial magazines. Wall Street is laying off a lot of financial analysts because AI is now being able to do a lot of the basic tasks that financial analysts would normally be employed to do. So you have an increase in technology, and financial analysts, the basic financial analysts are no longer needed, um, or at least not so many are no longer needed because technology has improved. Um, Labor market policies, minimum wage, unemployment insurance. Uh, if uh, if there's a change in labor markets, so for example, the with the offshoring of manufacturing, uh, you don't need so many manufacturing jobs. Minimum wage can actually increase unemployment. So if say your state government or the federal government raises minimum wages, that's great for if you're a new employee, or you uh, want a minimum wage. But if they raise the minimum wage, well, that means companies will not hire as many people because their labor costs are going to be going up because they have to pay employees more money. And so, if there's a minimum wage increase, companies who hire minimum wage workers, like say in fast food or maybe in stores, retail stores, they may not hire as many people because they don't want to have their labor costs go up. Um, unemployment insurance. If you've ever been laid off, uh, you typically are can get unemployment insurance, which means you get like maybe not your entire salary, but you get a partial salary of what you were earning. Well, that means you don't have to hurry up and find another job because you have kind of like a cushion while you try to look for another job. So you might have unemployment insurance for several months, and you may not be in any hurry to look for a new job. Um, and then, of course, demographics, labor force participation, and global shocks. Demographics, as as the people in the economy become older, they might have their 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 experience changes, and so they might be looking for different jobs. Also, if you have a huge younger workforce with limited or no experience, then you might have to have extra people training these people uh, when they enter the labor force. Um, then you have global shocks. The big example is a pandemic where everybody got laid off because we were all shutting down. So these are all causes and determinants of unemployment. Economic and social impacts. Well, what happens when you have unemployment? Well, one, you have lost output or GDP gap. Uh, you might have, if you have a high unemployment, you are not using those skilled workers, and so you might have a decrease in the output or a decrease in the GDP. And you might have higher fiscal costs, meaning if you have more people unemployed, uh, states are going to have to um, maybe increase unemployment benefits, or they're going to have to be paying people when they've been laid off, and that's a cost to the local government. Long-term skills erosions for prolonged unemployment. So if you've been unemployed for 6 months or a year or even longer, uh, you're not keeping up to date your skill set. You may, forget some things, or you may fail to learn new tools that are being introduced in your particular specialty or your industry. Um, so for example, if you are in the tech industry is constantly changing. And if by chance you get laid off and you're unemployed for a year, um, there's new technology being introduced and you may fall behind. And so that could be a negative impact for you, and not just you, but for many people. Distributional effects, young workers, minorities often experience higher rates of unemployment. So younger people, because maybe they don't have the maturity, or maybe they don't have the skills or the work experience, they might experience a higher unemployment rate than the general population. Also, minorities may often have experience higher uh, unemployment rates, and this could be due to a lot of social factors. It could be a lack of education, it could be discrimination, and there could be other reasons. Um, Political and social consequences. Well, as a result of unemployment, you may have higher inequality. So, people that are employed, they're making money versus people that are unemployed, but they're looking for jobs. They don't have as much money to spend, and uh, there's a growing inequality. Mental health concerns. If anybody's ever been laid off or fired, a lot of times they're depressed or they're frustrated. Uh, Maybe they're frustrated by their old employee, but they're also frustrated because maybe they can't find a suitable job to meet their needs. And there's also been crime correlations with high unemployment. So if people are out of work and they can't get money somehow, then there is a chance that the crime might increase. And it could be petty crime like theft or fraud, or it could be more severe crime such as violence, if they're angry and unemployed and they don't have any money. Um, so this is the latest statistics from the U.S. unemployment rate from August 2015 to August 2025. And so I just want to point out a few things on here. The typical unemployment rate, I guess you might say the standard, is 4%. 4% has been benchmarked as like a decent unemployment rate. If it falls below 4%, if it's less than 4%, then you might have a problem where the economy is starting to overheat, meaning, companies are hiring, but there's not enough workers or not enough qualified workers, and um, and also with everybody being employed, everybody's being employed, they're all spending money. It could impact inflation. So 4% is usually the general guide that 4% is not bad. If it's higher than 4%, if it's greater than 4%, um, then you have the problem of where you might have increased crime, you have increased inequality, um, you might have um, uh, lost output, maybe a decrease in GDP. So, but 4% is usually the target that Federal Reserve and policymakers try to aim for. And if we go back here, like right now, today, if you were to look in August 2025, right here at this point, the unemployment rate is a little over 4%. That's probably, I think the latest statistic was like 4.2. Not bad, but if it increases, it could become problematic. And then, of course, you had back in 2023, you had really low employment. It was like down to like 3%. And if you recall, 2023, we had a huge increase in inflation because everybody's working, everybody is buying more products, and it sounds great, but prices might be affected. And then, of course, we had our peak unemployment during the pandemic, and that looked like it reached almost 15%. So almost 15% unemployment, where lots of people were out of work and frustrated. And I don't have the crime statistics, but during this period, you had kind of like an increase in crime because, a lot of people are unemployed, they don't have any money, and so they're like looking for ways to try to get some extra cash. And it was a difficult time for a lot of people. And then, of course, if you go on earlier, we had low unemployment during the teens, like 2017, 2019. We had 5% unemployment back in 2015, and that's a little bit on the high side, but that's kind of left over from the Great Recession that we had, the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, 2010. And that's kind of a little bit of a leftover. But that's the current unemployment rate for the United States. And I have some more statistics. We can break this down into groups. So we have the unemployment rate by demographic group, and this is for August 2025. So overall, the unemployment rate, like I said, is about a little over 4%, like 4.2, 4.3 roughly. This is the overall unemployment rate. This is what they'll typically quote in the news if you're reading about unemployment. But men who are over the age of 20, their unemployment rate is slightly lower. Women who are over 20, again, it's around 4.2, 4.3%. It's not bad. Teenagers 16 to 19, well, they tend to have a high unemployment rate. Um, and that might be because they're busy with college and or simply lack of skills. They want a job, but they can't find a job because, well, they're young and they don't have any work experience. Um, and there could be other reasons, teenagers maybe getting into trouble or being irresponsible, or you've seen it yourself. You've probably gone to a store and the cashier or the clerk is looking at their cell phone instead of helping you. So uh, teenagers tend to have a high unemployment. Uh, Black or African American, they also tend to have higher unemployment than the general population. Um, and again, it could be a lack of education. Maybe they don't have the educational skills, uh, access to quality education. It could also be due to uh, maybe discrimination. And Hispanic, Latino, similar situation, uh, but a little bit less. And then we have white people in general. White people, again, it's around 4%. And then we have Asian people, which uh, is a little bit lower than white people. I don't want to get into stereotypes, but a lot of times Asian people are, the stereotypical view is that they're always hardworking and very focused on learning and acquiring new skills. So they tend to also have a low unemployment rate. All right. So policy responses and debates. Well, this is where it gets into the realm of politics, and I don't want to get too much into it, but I'll just briefly say this. When you have unemployment rates, you have lots of policymakers who have all sorts of ideas of how to solve unemployment, how to reduce it. Uh, the monetary policy, the Fed's interest rate decisions in response to labor market strength and weakness. So one tool that the Federal Reserve has is that if there is high unemployment rate and companies don't want to hire, then what the Federal Reserve could do is lower the interest rate, and which makes borrowing cost cheaper and allows companies to spend a little bit more money on hiring workers. And so that's one tool that the Federal Reserve can do to help with high unemployment. Again, they also have to look at other factors as well before they actually do lower interest rates. But this is a tool that can be helpful. Another is fiscal policies. This would be more related to the what the government can do, and this could be a local government, it could be a state government, or the federal government. They can provide job programs, they can provide stimulus, wage subsidies, retraining programs. So if you have an industry that's been hit, or you have uh, uh, a recession where everybody's getting hit, uh, the government can provide some kind of retraining program or job program. Stimulus would be like your unemployment insurance. So if so for example, during the pandemic, when lots of people were unemployed and we were shut down for a long time due to COVID, the government extended unemployment benefits. So they provided a stimulus to help workers because we didn't know how long this thing was going to last. And so they extended unemployment insurance. Wage subsidies, uh, a lot of times uh, your wage could be subsidized through government intervention. And then, of course, the retraining programs. Another way to respond to unemployment is the active labor market policies. So this would be up to companies or unions or any professional group. They could provide training, they could provide job search assistance. I've been laid off from a job, and one thing they did was provide the company itself provided uh, assistance with looking for other job, whether it be looking for another job in the same company or providing helping you search for jobs in similar industry. So they can assist with that. They can also assist with relocation support. So you get laid off in one city, um, or if you're looking for a job and you end up finding one in another city, they could provide, assistance with, helping to relocate, providing maybe a um, either uh, assistance with the cost of moving from one city to another. Then, of course, there's trade-offs. So the biggest trade-off is on inflation and unemployment. If you want low unemployment, then inflation is going to go up, because if everybody's working, everybody's making money, and so everybody's spending their money, and so demand for products and services increases. So if you have, this is why I say that earlier I said 4% was usually the kind of the benchmark where the government and the Federal Reserve is very happy. But if it falls below 4%, then that could trigger inflation. And vice versa, if you want low inflation, then you may have higher unemployment, because if you want to lower inflation, you're going to raise interest rates, which is going to slow down the economy, which means companies are going to either not hire or start laying off. So that's kind of the inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Then, of course, there's also trade-offs of short-term stimulus versus long-term structural reform. Short-term stimulus could be things like providing loans to companies or providing unemployment insurance to laid off workers. That's typically for the short term. Long-term structural reform is where you really are trying to plan didn't mean to cross it out, but you really are trying to change the structure of the economy. One big thing that's been in the news the past few years is trying to bring back manufacturing jobs from overseas. That would be considered a long-term structural reform, and that requires a delicate way of trying to handle that, because we do have a comparatively expensive labor force compared to manufacturing in China or Southeast Asia or some of these other countries. And so currently the tariffs, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, whether you agree, disagree, but the attempt is to try to bring back manufacturing jobs. So that would be an example of a long-term structural reform. Now, will it work? I'm not going to get into that. That's a debate for another time, but that's what's attempted to be the tariffs that we're experiencing is the attempt to bring back manufacturing jobs, and that would be an example of a long-term structural reform. All right, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and stay tuned. Next week I'll put out another video. Thanks again.